October 3, 1942. Peenemünde Army Research Center, Baltic Coast, Germany. The roar is deafening. Engineers shield their faces as a column of fire tears across the sky. The world's first ballistic missile, the Aggregate 4, later christened the V2, has just broken through the clouds. Werner von Braun, 30 years old, stands on a concrete platform beside his team, smoke curling around his boots. Heute haben wir die Zukunft gesehen, he murmurs. Today we have seen the future. But this is not a vision of exploration. It's a weapon test. Within 2 years, these same rockets will rain down on London, Antwerp, and Paris, leaving thousands dead. The V2, traveling faster than the speed of sound, cannot be intercepted. It hits without warning, the ultimate terror weapon of the Reich. Inside the labs of Peenemünde, engineers toast their success. The complex hums with activity. Drafting tables, liquid oxygen tanks, polished steel tubes, and chalkboards filled with equations. Outside, SS guards patrol the perimeter under floodlights. Prisoners from the nearby Mittelbau-Dora labor camp shovel sand and assemble rocket parts until they collapse. The cost of progress is measured in lives, not hours. At night, von Braun writes in his notebook, his candle flickering. He dreams of the stars, not destruction. He sketches a rocket reaching orbit, leaving Earth behind. But war has chained his vision to Hitler's demands. The Führer calls the V2 a vengeance weapon. Propaganda reels show London burning, while Goebbels declares the dawn of a new era of warfare. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States is experimenting with primitive missiles. The Wack Corporal, the Aerojet jet-assisted takeoff units, crude compared to Peenemunde's polished giants. German scientists laugh when they hear of it. The Americans, one engineer jokes, are children with firecrackers. But what no one in Peenemünde realizes is that Germany's empire of steel and flame is crumbling. The Red Army is closing in, the Allies are landing in France, and soon the men who built Hitler's rockets will have to choose: surrender to the Soviets or gamble on the Americans. Von Braun looks once more at the night sky through the smoke of his own creation and whispers to himself, one day this won't be for war. But he doesn't yet know where that dream will lead, or how far from home it will take him. May 2nd, 1945. Central Germany. Harz Mountains. The Third Reich is collapsing. Columns of refugees clog the roads. Smoke from burned-out towns hangs low over the valleys. Deep within these forests, a convoy of trucks creeps along a dirt road under the cover of darkness. Werner von Braun and his Peenemünde team, carrying their last hope, boxes of blueprints, technical notes, and fragments of the V2's guidance system. Von Braun sits in the cab beside his brother, Magnus von Braun, clutching a bundle of papers tied with string. His arm is in a sling, broken in a car crash while fleeing the advancing Soviets. His face is pale, drawn, but his mind is focused. The Russians will take everything, Magnus mutters. They'll take us too if they find us first, Werner replies. They know that Soviet forces are sweeping west, desperate to capture the rocket scientists. The Americans, meanwhile, are racing east for the same prize. The V2 technology could decide the future of warfare, or the next century of science. At dawn, the convoy halts near Oberloch, a small Bavarian village. The engineers destroy what they can't carry: crates of sensitive parts, test gyroscopes, propellant pumps. Smoke rises from a heap of burning documents. Von Braun gathers his closest aides. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, "our loyalty is no longer to a nation. It's to the future. The Americans will understand that. The Soviets, will not." Hours later, they make contact with an American patrol. Men of the 44th Infantry Division. A nervous standoff follows until Magnus steps forward, raising his hands. "My brother is Werner von Braun," he says in halting English. "We wish to surrender to the Americans." The soldiers stare, unsure what to make of the soot-covered scientists in civilian clothes. Behind them, the remnants of Nazi Germany are burning. Ahead, the uncertain light of a new world. Within days, US intelligence confirms their identity. Von Braun and more than 100 members of his Peenemünde team are moved under armed escort to Garmisch-Partenkirchen, then quietly relocated to a secret facility for interrogation. American officers study the captured materials with awe. Blueprints for rockets that can reach the edge of space, guidance systems years ahead of anything in the US arsenal. Colonel Holger Toftoy, a visionary within the US Army Ordnance Department, recognizes the potential. "Gentlemen," he says to his superiors, "we can either compete with these men or hire them." Thus begins Operation Paperclip, a top-secret mission to bring Germany's greatest scientific minds to America, not as prisoners, but as assets. Von Braun, signing the paperwork under an assumed employment title, hesitates for a moment. He glances down at the fine print. To assist the United States in rocket research and development. He sets down the pen and murmurs almost to himself, "From vengeance to vision." The war in Europe ends a week later. But for von Braun and for history, a far greater race is just beginning. Not to destroy, but to reach farther than any human ever has. September 1945. Fort Bliss, Texas. The desert wind howls across endless sand and scrub. Under the blistering sun, a convoy of trucks rolls toward a cluster of hangars surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Inside the trucks sit Werner von Braun and his team of Peenemünde engineers. Men once hailed as the Reich's scientific elite, now silent guests of their former enemies. They step out, blinking into the sunlight. Around them, American soldiers watch with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The Germans' black uniforms are gone, replaced with plain khaki work clothes. Their new life begins here, under US supervision, in the middle of nowhere. Von Braun looks out across the barren expanse and says softly, "It's no Baltic coast and sea, but the sky is still the same." At White Sands Proving Ground nearby, captured V-2 rockets are being reassembled from crates of twisted metal, salvaged in Germany. The US Army wants to understand them, how they work, how they can be improved, how far they can go. American technicians, many of them young and inexperienced, struggle to decipher the complex German schematics. "This looks like alien language," one jokes. Von Braun's engineers glance at one another, exchanging faint smiles. Bit by bit, collaboration begins. The Americans bring resources, safety, and boundless optimism. The Germans bring precision, mathematics, and the ghosts of Peenemünde. Together they rebuild. By 1946, the first test rocket is ready. Under the glaring sun, engineers in canvas hats cluster around launch stands. A red flare bursts, ignition. The captured V-2, painted with new American markings, roars to life and climbs into the sky over New Mexico. Soldiers cheer, photographers snap pictures. Von Braun watches from a distance, his eyes hidden behind dark goggles. "It's strange," he tells a young American lieutenant beside him, "to see my weapon fly again and feel proud, not guilty." In Washington, the military sees potential beyond weapons. The US Army Ordnance Department, General Electric, and Jet Propulsion Laboratory begin integrating lessons from the German program. Scientists like Theodor von Karman and Robert Goddard's former students suddenly find their early experiments vindicated. But not everyone welcomes the newcomers. Some journalists call it a moral compromise. Nazi scientists brought to America under secret deal. Von Braun avoids the press. He buries himself in work, sketching ideas for a new generation of rockets. Not for warheads, but for orbit. He imagines satellites circling the Earth, manned capsules reaching beyond the atmosphere. By 1949, the Cold War has begun. The Soviet Union, aided by their own captured German engineers, launches Operation Ossowiecim, developing missiles in parallel. The world that once fought to destroy Germany now fights to control its legacy. And amid this uneasy rivalry, the Peenemünde scientists continue their quiet labor in the desert. Every successful test carries the same echo. the same deep thunder that once terrified London. But now, that thunder means something different. As von Braun writes in his diary that year, "The rocket's destiny is tied to mankind's destiny. We built it for war. Now we must learn to use it for wonder." July 29, 1950. Cape Canaveral, Florida. The humid air shimmers above a concrete launch pad overlooking the Atlantic. Engineers in short-sleeved uniforms adjust dials and instruments while seabirds wheel overhead. The countdown echoes through loudspeakers. 10, 9, 8. On the pad stands a rocket that once bore the insignia of the Wehrmacht. The V-2, now reborn as the Bumper Whack, a hybrid of German engineering and American innovation. At its heart lies von Braun's design, but its soul belongs to a new purpose: exploration. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engines roar to life. The rocket surges upward, flames spilling from its tail. This time the world does not cower, it watches in awe. For von Braun and his team, the launch is more than a test. It is vindication, proof that the knowledge once chained to Hitler's war machine now belongs to the world's imagination. The Bumper 8 reaches an altitude of over 250 miles, higher than any man-made object in history. It pierces the edge of space. Standing at the edge of the launch field, von Braun removes his cap, the ocean wind tugging at his hair. "Now," he murmurs, "we are finally pointing the right way." As the 1950s unfold, von Braun's team moves again, this time to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. The Army assigns them to build America's first guided ballistic missile. They call it the Redstone rocket. The project transforms the sleepy southern town into the new cradle of American rocketry. Rows of barracks become laboratories. Cafes begin serving schnitzel alongside apple pie. Locals nickname the German engineers the Rocket Boys. Yet behind the smiles lies tension. Many Americans still struggle to reconcile these men's past with their present contributions. Newspaper editorials ask, "Can we trust the men who built Hitler's weapons?" Von Braun answers not with words, but with progress. Under his direction, the Redstone becomes the foundation for something greater: the Jupiter series, then Explorer 1, America's first satellite launch vehicle. On January 31, 1958, the world changes again. From Cape Canaveral, a slender rocket streaks into the night sky, carrying a tiny instrument-laden sphere the size of a basketball. Within minutes, Explorer 1 achieves orbit. Cheers erupt across the control room. The United States is finally in space. For a brief moment, the ghosts of Peenemünde are silent. The engineers who once built weapons of vengeance now build vessels of knowledge. In the months that follow, von Braun becomes a household name. He appears in Life magazine, writes essays about interplanetary travel, and even collaborates with Walt Disney on educational films about spaceflight. He speaks not of war, but of dreams, of lunar bases, Mars expeditions, and the destiny of mankind among the stars. His German accent, once a symbol of the enemy, now carries the promise of the future. Still, he knows that progress is never free of shadows. Each success is haunted by memories of what it took to get here: the forced laborers of Mittelbau-Dora, the wreckage of London, the moral debt that can never be fully repaid. But history has given the rocket a second life. And as von Braun often says in interviews, nature does not care about nations. The laws of physics belong to everyone. In that truth lies the paradox of the 20th century. The same fire that once burned cities will one day light the way to the moon. October 4th, 1957. Baikonur Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan. The steppe is silent except for the wind. Then, at 10:28 p.m., a low rumble builds across the desert, deep, guttural, and alien. A slender silver rocket rises from a pad ringed by floodlights, its tail aflame in the night. Seconds later, the roar fades into the stratosphere. The rocket's name is RR-7 Semyorka, and its payload, a polished sphere of aluminum called Sputnik 1, has just made history. Half a world away in the United States, that soundless beep from orbit strikes like a thunderclap. Radios across the nation pick up the rhythmic pulse. Beep, beep, beep. For the first time, humanity has touched the heavens. And it is not America, but the Soviet Union that got there first. At Redstone Arsenal, Wernher von Braun stands beside a chalkboard full of orbital equations. Reporters crowd the hallway outside. "Dr. von Braun," one calls through the door, "did the Russians beat us because they had better rockets?" He doesn't answer immediately. Then, softly, "No, they beat us because they were allowed to try." For years, von Braun's proposals for satellite launches had been dismissed as fantasy by Washington bureaucrats. Now, in the shadow of Sputnik, everything changes overnight. The United States forms the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, funds a new civilian space agency, NASA, and calls on von Braun's team to deliver results fast. 1958, Cape Canaveral. The launch pad is alive with motion. Engineers swarm over a Redstone rocket modified for a new purpose: to send America's first astronaut into space. Von Braun, now head of the Marshall Space Flight Center, watches with arms folded. His hair has begun to gray, but his eyes burn with the same intensity they held at Peenemünde. This time, he says to a colleague, "It's not for vengeance, it's for mankind." The Soviets launch again. Yuri Gagarin, April 12, 1961. One orbit around the Earth. The headlines read, "The humiliation is total." President John F. Kennedy, under political pressure, demands a goal bold enough to restore pride. On May 25, 1961, he stands before Congress and declares, "Before this decade is out, we shall land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth." The challenge electrifies von Braun's team. For the first time, their knowledge is bound not to a nation or a weapon, but to a vision that transcends Earth itself. At Huntsville, engineers labor around the clock designing a rocket that dwarfs anything before it, the Saturn V. Its engines thunder with 7.5 million pounds of thrust, capable of lifting 45 tons beyond its Earth's gravity. In its blueprints, you can still trace the lineage of the V2, but now stretched upward toward the stars, not outward toward cities. In those years, von Braun becomes both hero and ghost. American children write him letters asking what space is like. Activists protest outside his office, calling him a war criminal. He answers neither directly. When asked by a journalist if he feels guilt for his past, he pauses before replying, "We aimed for the moon. Hitler aimed for London. The difference is all the difference in the world." The space race consumes nations, drives science, and captures imaginations. But behind the headlines, von Braun still wrestles with his own paradox. The same equations that once defined destruction now define destiny. Every success echoes with ghosts. Every rocket fired carries the weight of history. Still, the countdown continues. And on a humid summer morning in July 1969, the final act begins. July 16, 1969. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The air hums with anticipation. Hundreds of thousands of people line the beaches and causeways, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The Saturn V, gleaming white against the morning sky, towers above the launch pad like a monument to both genius and guilt. At launch control, Wernher von Braun stands near the glass observation window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Around him, consoles flicker, technicians murmur into headsets, and the final countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. Through the window, the rocket seems almost alive, steam venting from its flanks, light glinting off its silvered edges. Von Braun's heart beats faster. He's seen hundreds of launches before, but never this one. This one carries the sum of his life. The triumph and the burden both. 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The floor trembles. A column of fire engulfs the pad. Apollo 11 rises, slow and unstoppable, into the endless blue. Hours later, As the rocket vanishes into the heavens, Von Braun remains alone by the window. A single tear traces down his cheek. One of the younger engineers approaches him. "Dr. Von Braun," he says softly, "you did it." Von Braun shakes his head. "We did it. The rocket did what it was always meant to do, to leave the Earth, not destroy it." For the next 4 days, the world watches as Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins journey toward the moon. When Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface, his words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," echo in television sets across the planet. In Huntsville, the engineers who once built weapons of war now weep openly. For them, the moon landing is more than a victory. It is redemption. Years later, Von Braun sits alone in his office overlooking the Alabama hills. The shelves are lined with models: the V2, the Redstone, the Saturn V. On his desk lies an unfinished report titled "The Future of Manned Spaceflight." Outside, children play in the grass, their laughter mingling with the hum of cicadas. He picks up a photograph. His team at Peenemünde, 1943. Smiling young men in black uniforms, unaware of what their brilliance would cost. He places it beside another. His American engineers at Marshall Space Flight Center. Faces streaked with sweat and joy during the Apollo countdown. Two worlds, bound by one dream. When a journalist asks him late in life whether he considers himself a German, an American, or something else, Von Braun answers simply, "I am a citizen of Earth, trying to leave it better than I found it." June 16, 1977. Alexandria, Virginia. Rain taps softly against the hospital window. Von Braun, now frail and pale, stares at the ceiling. On the nightstand beside him rests a small model of the Saturn V, a gift from a NASA colleague. He closes his eyes, whispering a line he once wrote in his youth. "Our purpose is not to conquer the stars, but to understand our place among them." Outside, the world he helped shape continues. Satellites circling overhead, astronauts training for Mars, the echo of engines that began in a forest on the Baltic coast. When historians trace the arc of the 20th century, from the terror of the V2 to the wonder of Apollo, one truth endures: science has no morality, only direction. It is humanity that decides whether a rocket falls or flies. And somewhere beyond the clouds, the legacy of Peenemünde still burns. Not as a weapon, but as a light,